David Lane, come and stand next to me, please. Thank you so much. Ben Lovett, come and stand next to David, please. Fantastic. David, what are you best known for?
Best known for? I think my career has been advocacy around public policy, if I'm known for anything. What do you think, Earthrin? Yeah, okay.
Right. Ben,
Yeah.
what are you best known for?
Oh, I get it.
Being a musician, I think. Yeah.
Yes, a diplomat and a musician, you're right.
Any particular band?
Yeah, a band from London called Mumford Sons.
All right. So I asked backstage, David and Ben, what on earth are you doing on stage together? And you told me the best story. Who wants to start it?
Well, it's very simple. Ben and I are pals for maybe 7 years or so. I wish we could say we met advocating for food aid reform or on a farm, but in fact, Ben and his band were asked by President Obama to play at a state dinner, and I was randomly seated at the same table, and we've been friends ever since. He calls me up, he says he's been asked to come speak at the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations annual food symposium. Is it the real deal? And I said, the real deal? The last time I went, President Obama came, and Bono, they spoke, I think, back to back. I said, for sure it's the real deal. He said, okay, then I'll do it. And then he comes back to me and says, but I did tell them only if you would do it with me.
And so history was made.
Yeah.
Ben and David, take a couch.
Okay. Oh, he's going to take the couch. You're the patient. I just have a couple notes to guide us through this, but I indicated how Ben and I met. Oh, let me introduce him beyond what was already said. He's not only a very accomplished, successful, popular musician, he is an entrepreneur. Has a music company, a touring company, owns nightclubs, a restaurant, and in all of those things has a real connectedness to kind of what's going on, especially young people. He's a very soulful guy, got a big heart, but he's also got a big brain, which we're going to put to work today. And one thing that separates us, he's a young person. I'm not a young person. I'll say a word about myself. I used to be in this space. I had, when Earthrin Cousin was running the World Food Program, I was the U.S. ambassador to the UN agencies in Rome focused on food security. And Gail Smith was just here from 2007 to 2010. I was the CEO of the One campaign. So my career has been at the intersection of public policy and advocacy. And so I know a little bit about food security. And I suppose that's why I'm here. But let's start with Ben. You said when you arrived last night that people on the plane were asking you why you were going to Washington, and you told them you were going to this food symposium, and they said, what?
Yeah.
So why are you here?
I think it's very nice to be invited to come and talk about issues of activating people to action. And I feel like that might be the reason. There was a moment where I felt like they got the wrong guy. But no, I think whether it be through the band or through Communion, which is this music company, the work I've done with Global Citizen, so much of the common thread amongst all of that is how do you inspire people to come together under one kind of common principle or basis. And there is kind of a unilateral approach, I think, there that maybe it would be helpful for people to understand. Yeah. You know, it's kind of a primal level.
One thing Ben and I talked about is so much of what's going on these 2 days is focused on young people in the developing world, and neither of us would claim expertise in that zone. I've traveled a good bit in Africa, and I'm going to ask you later about your collaboration with musicians in Africa. But I think for the purposes of understanding where we're going, we want to talk more about how to engage young people in the North, or that's really the primary thing. And I want to put something on the table. This may be the only thing I say, then I'm going to go back to asking questions. About a schizophrenia I had, and I've talked to Earthrin about it when I was in Rome. So by day, people, like I think most of you, are focusing on how we feed 9.5 billion people by 2050 with fewer inputs, on the same or less land, in the face of climate change, and with an increased focus on nutrition. That was the equation we were trying to solve for in Rome for the 4 years when I was ambassador there. By night, most of us have friends in Washington or New York or London or Rome or even in small town America now who are total foodies. And they're obsessed with where it came from and how it was prepared and what it looks like, and they want to take a picture of it, and it's all so precious. And for the first 3 years I was in Rome, I could not reconcile these two things. I thought they were completely divergent. The only things I thought they had in common were nutrition and joy, because food is the source of joy for the poorest people in the world and richest people in the world. Then I started to meet these activist chefs, and we had dinner with some of them last night, and I realized I was totally wrong. In fact, these thoughtful chefs today are thinking about sustainability, the dignity of everybody in the food chain, in the value chain for food, and especially their focus on sustainability leads them to focus on innovation. And I think many of the things that happen in the rich world are going to have profound effects on agriculture in the developing world. So for the purposes of this discussion, I think I want to put that on the table, that we're not talking about two different food systems. We're talking about greater and greater convergence. And I actually had a couple quotes, and then this is the last you'll hear from me, maybe, that I want to put on the table that I think might inform our discussion. I want to ask Ben to react to them. I was watching Dan Barber, who was a great an example of these conscientious chefs. It was the TV program on Netflix called Chef's Table, I think. And there was a food critic named Ruth Reichel who said in that show, "We now have a generation of young people who understand that eating is an ethical act in a way that no previous generation ever did." And I think that's very, very profound and is very unusual and has enormous implications for what everybody here does. And then secondly, I was talking to Marco Galtieri, who runs something called Seeds and Chips in Milan. And he said to me, for young people today, food is like a language through which they express themselves and connect with each other. And that to me is also very interesting, something that at least I would not have thought of on my own. But when I look at the Instagram pictures that my nieces and nephews are sending me of everything that they eat and everything they cook, it starts to resonate. And then lastly, I'll say Mitchell Davis from the James Beard Foundation, who I think was talking last night and who we saw last night, was saying he thinks food now is almost like rock and roll, in that it can be this disruptive thing. It's a way, whereas people once mimicked Elvis, now they mimic chefs they see on TV, and young people were trying to evoke some of that. And in fact, they declare their food philosophy to their parents. Like you might have said, I'm against the Vietnam War. It's a statement of your identity. And so I just wonder on those three things, young people and food, something that I would not easily comprehend. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's certainly interesting to see the rise of food as a medium in which people can express themselves. I think that's maybe a bit of a shift. For a long time, at least the one generation or two above myself, there was a lot to do with kind of tribalism. So it was your genre, whether that be your music or your film taste, but also where you ate. And there were kind of fairly rigid boundaries around that. And the idea of kind of blowing that apart, the deconstruction of, or maybe the explosion of information through the digital age has meant that everyone can kind of be a hybrid and a discoverer and an entrepreneur. And when that is applied to food, it means that you get people using food as a medium to have a conversation in a way that I don't think has ever been done before. So it's not kind of a destination, it's actually being used as a vehicle. So I think on that level, we're seeing a shift. Yeah.
Let me ask about your work, your day job, or I guess it's your night job.
Yeah.
Mumford Sons. I've been to a number, I'm a fan, I'll mention that, and I've been to a number of your shows, and you're not, your band is not a particularly political band, and yet it's inescapable that there's a strong sense of community among your band, and I think I would even say that there are these positive values in the air related to dignity and respect for others, tolerance, and a really kind of a spirit of optimism. When your band takes the stage, beyond entertaining, What are you hoping to achieve? Is there something deliberate that you're trying to build there?
Yeah, I think music, like food, and I will constantly be trying to build bridges here, but music transcends a lot of those significant but somewhat kind of restrictive issues around politics or even necessarily whether you've had a good or a bad day. I think when people come to a show, we, like them, want to kind of transcend into a place where we're having a kind of a moment that's on a more of a human level. Mm-hmm. And so you're looking at other principles, whether it be a shared experience, something that is communal. It's got nothing to do with your kind of your views or your take or your religious beliefs or your political. None of that really matters. And that's something that we really bonded over. And I think that the larger that experience gets, we were very fortunate very early on to have success that put us into the environment of arenas. Played our first arena 8 years ago in Canada, and then found that around the world that was kind of our platform. And that was 15,000 to 20,000 people every night where you'd have this moment. And that commonality, I think, is infectious. It was addictive to us. Yeah. And then we found it as a way to not kind of in any way do anything more than we were just trying to play songs, and we were singing songs with people singing. It's like we were all mutually singing our songs together. Yeah. But there's something in that psychologically that I think is very liberating. And as you reflect on it, I think, and we've just gone through our kind of 10-year anniversary, which is a natural kind of time to reflect. And you start to think, what's actually going on there? What's this binding force? And that's where I'm starting to explore it in other areas as well.
You were saying something backstage about globalization and identity, and how globalization in many ways undermines many of the sources of identity that people, whether it's indigenous people in a certain country or whatever other kind of things gave people a sense of belonging. Do you think that, does that play any role in fans kind of identifying with it, that this is something they have in common or something they share with other people?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of ways to get into that, but it's like we found, although on a media level there was a kind of a desire to box us up into some sort of a genre, we found there was a like-mindedness as we traveled around the world with other artists from lots of different genres, different ages, backgrounds. It didn't really matter. And through that, we found that we kind of created our own sense of tribe. And when you go to a show, or a lot of young people go to festivals and hold on to their wristbands for years. And that's a badge of honor. Like, that's their tribe that they've ascribed to, because they can travel now more than ever. They can aspire to go and enjoy kind of an event, or taste and experience things on a much more of a global level. But I think what we were saying before was that it's also necessary to remember that a sense of belonging is crucial throughout that, and to kind of make everything too open source actually leads to a kind of a rise of depression and people being a bit lost as to what the point is here. So I've done a lot of work with Global Citizen, as I mentioned before. And a symposium like this is fantastic in what it's trying to achieve, but I think we can all become so globally focused that we also just forget on the local issues. And I do believe that some of the things around food sustainability can be solved on our doorstep first, before we start looking thousands of miles away. And a lot of people who maybe even come across as hypocritical in a sense that they think they can solve something whilst they're still messy. And I hope that we can kind of take a stark look in the mirror in that sense and fix some of these issues at home. It would be great.
Let me suggest a positive aspect of globalization. I hadn't been on college campuses for a long time until I was the one campaign, and then when I was ambassador, I had an occasion to go talk to. And I was floored, probably shouldn't have been, by the incredible diversity ethnic and geographic of American college campuses, but also their own sort of orientation toward the world. When I was in college, I'm fair to say, we went to Fort Lauderdale for spring break. Now they build schools in Guatemala, and the number of kids who were in the early 2000s majoring in global health, which just exploded. I hope some of this is happening now with agriculture, because that's now back on the radar screen. But I'm just wondering about cross-cultural connections. And back to the band, again, neither of us are going to claim the deepest insight into what goes on in Africa or the developing world, but you did concerts in Johannesburg, which led to a recording with the great Baba Mal from Senegal, and then I think he did some stuff with you maybe in the UK, and I know you were in Senegal not long ago. Well, can you say anything about both about the experience, but also whether that resonated with your fans, or whether there's some connection across boundaries that's worth building on?
I think on a cultural level, it was very humbling to remember just how little people care about Mumford Sons in Senegal. We spent a week there. We traveled up the Senegal River to Podor, which is a small village just on the Mauritania border. And we went as a guest of Baba's. Baba's become a good friend of ours over the last 6 years. He came and played a music festival that we hosted in Lewis, a small village south of London. And this was a bit of a cultural exchange. That was the idea. And he's been putting this festival on for, I think this was the 11th year. And we were the first Western band to perform at that. But there was a kind of another element to it, which was for us to understand Baba and his life. And this was his home. This is his village that he grew up in. And part of why we do what we do as musicians is to explore and learn and grow as individuals, as well as kind of play our instruments and play our songs. So it was very interesting on that level. I think simply on a food level in Podor, one of the talking points was the limitations behind options. Yeah. And so the limited diet, not that anyone was complaining, or not that kind of malnutrition was a particularly major issue there. It's, they're kind of farming on the banks of the river. But I would say that everything that I'm starting to understand about the need for your 5 a day, and like your balance between your fiber and your having your greens and not having too much meat. Yeah. It's just so far removed from kind of necessary eating. Yeah. And it did get me thinking about whether, to your very first point, whether we're having a connected conversation here, where some people are saying it's brilliant to have kind of farm-to-table premium-style food offerings in global cities, whilst also talking about whether eating anything other than rice 365 days a year is possible. And I think it is necessary that we look at the kind of nutrition elsewhere. Yeah. Can
I, by the way, you shouldn't feel too humbled. I traveled once, I think it was 2010, with Bono to Ghana, and we went into the University of Accra, 1,000 students, and they had no idea who he was. And Mo Ibrahim, who was traveling with us, he was our board member, he's the cell phone king of Africa, took the stage, and it was a riot. It was like, and Bono quite rightly said, he's the rock star. And and that's as it should be. Mm. They look up to Mo because he was a great entrepreneur, and anyway, just add that. Now, can we talk? Because I think a number of these people are interested in advocacy, and I will declare that and I've been in advocacy much of my life, but I'm probably not current with what young people are thinking. And I'll say, last time I saw you was in London. I just come from a retreat on the future of foreign aid near Oxford, and they invited a couple of these young Rhodes Scholars, and this dazzling kid, probably 22, he's a philosophy major at Oxford. He said to all of us who were talking about how to motivate young people, he said, you guys have it totally wrong. Moral burden, all that stuff, forget about it. And he's actually one of the leaders in the effective altruism movement. He said, it's all about opportunity. That talk in the language of opportunity and you can get us all. But using that other language is going to get you nowhere. So you mentioned the entrepreneurship with communion, music, and the other things you do, your whole, in addition to your band, your world is public facing, and you're engaging with young people all the time. You are, in fact, a young person. Can you give us some insights into, you know, what drives people, what might be useful in terms of engaging people in advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that I love to do. One is to create jobs. So if I can build a company that provides a kind of a place of work or a way for someone to cover their family, I love that. So that's one of the main reasons why I do build new businesses. The second thing that I really enjoy is to get into the minds of and try and activate people. And the core principle behind that, I think, is to unlock people's self-interest. I think that people kind of assume that you can preach and get someone to meet you halfway, and you can maybe build their interest in what you have to offer them, or what you're like, of course you should care about this issue. And if they don't, then it's a huge waste of energy and time, in my opinion. Even if you get them there, each person that you're trying to get across that line, I think, is an unsustainable model. So I'm more interested along the lines of this thing I've been kind of going on about over the last 24 hours, is this concept of self-interest. And if we can unlock people's self-interest, like, why is this fundamentally good for me, whilst also making it clear that the knock-on effect of that is going to be good for someone else, then it's a win-win. And I think that's how you could even, most negotiators would say it's the same principles, and people would assume that's how you get on the same page with people. But when it comes to advocacy, I think people almost assume it's okay to kind of cold call or knock on doors and stomp and shout, whereas actually it should be a little bit subtler than that. And to create real change on a mass scale, it's almost that you need to get into some very basic common denominators of self-interest. What does everyone fundamentally care about? And then provide them with a way that will benefit them, and that will help us out on a global level.
You know, when I think back to what I think some people would consider a high watermark of advocacy around global health, and PEPFAR, the great President Bush's AIDS initiative that got bipartisan support and a number of wins back then. When the one campaign was first created, we had this, I have to admit, naive notion that my mother and her bridge group would be talking about malaria, you know, over their bridge table. That never happened. Maybe it will in someday, but I'm no longer thinking that's where we need to go.
Yeah.
All those great bipartisan initiatives were funded by left-wing idealists, or kind of right-leaning evangelicals who were motivated by that, business people who were thinking about markets, national security types who were worried about terrorism. It was basic blocking and tackling of a whole range of people, many of them motivated by self-interest, or what they regarded as their own interest. And I think there's certainly nothing wrong with that, and I think that's an important insight.
Yeah, I think we have to fess up to it. You know, I mean no offense when I say there's a lot of people here today with an agenda. There's people who have their agenda, whether it's an agenda, a professional agenda to forward a kind of a cause, or a personal agenda for growth and understanding. Yeah. It's the most important thing to step forward is to kind of speak about the elephant in the room, which is just the fact that people are here for themselves, right, to a degree. Yeah. And then find out what is it that we're all here for mutually. Yeah. And then start talking about that, rather than, otherwise people are just talking and the conversation's kind of going two ways, but neither's going in to either sets of ears, you know? Yeah, yeah. All right,
they have an aggressive clock here. I have one question I'm going to save till the end. I want to make one comment, because we keep talking about advocacy. I'm a huge champion of advocacy, but we also have to ask ourselves the question, at a time when our political system is broken, and I don't think that's a controversial statement, where people who believe in public policy, advocacy to generate public policy change has limited results. I think motivating young people is more than getting them to then call their congressman. Back to the idea that Ruth Reichel put forward of eating as an ethical act. I think young people have many ways through the choices of what they eat and who they support. Look at even in the aftermath of the shootings in Florida, before they could get any politicians to act. Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods took certain guns off the table, out of their stores as a response to the public pressure. And I think those of us in civil society maybe need to think more broadly about how we generate change when the political system is so broken. That's just an observation of mine. Okay, somebody submitted a question, which you can read, but they can't, so I'll read it. Perhaps older generations may not know who influences young people. How do we build generational bridges? So I guess that's a question about connecting people like me with people like you. Or maybe not. You can
yeah, how do we build generational bridges? I mean, I think it comes back to kind of core principles, trying to listen and understand, remembering the fact that everyone goes through the same journey and that older generations were younger generations. I think it has to be two ways. So I try and encourage, I have an investment in an influencer company, actually, that's mostly targeted on Instagram. And they kind of self-perpetuate, you know, influencers and influencer marketing is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more influence that you can garner, the more influence you have, and you know, it goes round and round. But respecting some of the systems that are in place through doing that and working with older generations, I'd probably more focus on how do you explain to younger generations. I'd ask them to look at how to create sustainable and systemic change. Because I think what people are forgetting now is they think that they're making an impact, and it's so short-lived. The tail that is happening on this advocacy, or you know, people are going out and they care about an issue so much passionately, and they've got soapboxes. There's more soapboxes now than ever before, and people can go and shout to their kind of echo chamber of social media. But that's not actually leading to anything that will impact their next generation. And I think there has to be a lot of respect paid to those that try to create a world in which systems were put in place to benefit future generations, rather than just looking out for a way to kind of scream and shout.
Okay, there's another question. Oh, well, so I think there were also going to be people raising their hands, and this is real for sure. But if somebody, I want to turn to the audience if that's what the fair thing to do is. If there's anybody who wants to ask a question from the audience, otherwise we'll take the one right in front of us. No, we're okay? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
My name is Carolyn Hart with JSI. I have a question that relates to one of the poll questions, which did not have the choice of commercial enterprises, advertising, or the marketplace as an influencer of young people.
Can you restate because I think neither of us may know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, while this has been going on, there's been a poll, and we've been asked what do we think are the influencers. And one of them had peers, politicians, et cetera, but it didn't have the marketplace. And I would love to hear from each of you, or one of you, your perspective on the power of the marketplace to influence young people's decisions.
Yeah.
Let's hear from him.
So I think that to adopt basic marketing strategies when it comes to human issues is a really smart way of moving forward. So if you're trying to convince someone to care about something that could impact change, or essentially what I'm saying that the building a bridge between philanthropy, for example, and private sector commerciality, kind of social entrepreneurship, is really important. And there are some basic marketing principles that go kind of to my point about self-interest that you can just touch upon and adopt, using those effectively, just as well as a major multinational. You know, if you were to put the head of marketing from Coca-Cola and plug them into an agency that was focused on nutritional education, for example, I bet you they would do a better job than that organization was doing, because they're going to just find a way to speak to people. It's like telling a narrative. That's
Great. Okay, so we have 1 minute and 23 seconds. I'm going to ask one last question. It's my prerogative. It was suggested to me, but I like the question, and it requires me to tell a little story before I ask the question. It's going to be about your own inspiration and mentorship and how you got on your path. But first, I want to tell the story. I had some young Italian musicians always play in my house. Earthman knows them well from parties I had there. And in particular, there was this 21-year-old self-taught guitar player, blues guitar player, who was a law student. Mumford Sons comes to town. We'd only met that one time at the state dinner. They've all of a sudden, they've won the Grammy for Best Album. They're playing in a place that only holds 4,000. They could have sold out a much bigger place, so it was an absolute sensation. I had tickets. At the last minute, I had an extra ticket. I brought the kid along. And I sent you a note, and you said, hey, man, you texted me just before you went on stage. Let's get together after the show, which we did. The show was so spectacular, and then visiting with you afterwards was very exciting. And the next day, the kid sends me an email, subject, change my life. It says, David, these things you show me, they changed my life. From this day forward, I cannot be a law student. From this day forward, it's me and my guitar. And he says, but what say you? Your opinion means a lot. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. What say your parents? And so he paused for 2 or 3 months, and then he sends a new email, changed my life too. And he says, this time it's for real. And he now is a music student and a phenomenal guitar player in Rome. When I told you that story, I just wanted you to know, I said, you know, they're all blaming me. The kid quit law school, but it was your band. You were the ones who inspired him. And you told me a story about your own inspiration, and I'll set it up by saying you must have been a science-oriented young person, because somehow you were studying astrophysics or something like that at Stanford as a teenager, and something happened. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I thought I was going to end up as an astrophysicist, and then I was very fortunately accosted, I guess, by Branford Marsalis, and I had a moment of a conversation. He basically invited me. The short version of the story is he invited me to have lunch with him after I professed my love for him the night before.
Didn't you barge into his dressing room?
Yeah,
let's be real. You're 15 years old and you barge into Branford Marsalis's dressing room to say you're the greatest.
Yeah, and he kicked me out. And the next day he said, "What are you doing? I think you should be a musician." I can tell. You know, we spent 2 hours just talking about our families and why he told me about why he was doing what he was doing, and I was so impressionable. I called my parents the next day and I was like, I want to do music for the rest of my life. And it was, those moments are possible. People can shift gears and completely change the direction. And I think maybe that was one of the moments that I realized that it's possible to.
I think what you said to me, but it's also not a reckless, random observation of his. He heard from you and he said, if you're so passionate about this, why aren't you pursuing music? Why? This is who you are. And I think, to me, that's a real lesson. I don't think your parents regret that you're not an astrophysicist. Maybe they do.
It took a few years, I'll tell you, yeah.
Can we all thank Ben for sharing his time with us? Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, let's go.
I feel we just witnessed the beginning of the Ben and David show. I would pay money for that. Well, not really, but it was good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben and David.